"Permit me to reflect your precise phrasing back to you, Madam Speaker," the gentleman articulated, as the expansive hearing room descended into an absolute and unyielding quiet. This was not the customary polite silence dictated by Senate parliamentary procedure, but rather the heavy, taut stillness of an environment acutely aware that a fundamental paradigm was on the verge of fracturing. Nancy Pelosi was seated elegantly behind the witness dais, adorned in a sophisticated Navy Chanel ensemble, with a classic strand of South Sea pearls resting gracefully against her collarbone. She had maintained a pleasant expression for the majority of the afternoon, exhibiting the measured, camera-ready composure of a seasoned stateswoman who had navigated the complex corridors of the United States Congress for 37 years without ever relinquishing her command over an audience. However, an imperceptible shift occurred in the atmosphere when the junior senator representing Ohio gently lifted a solitary sheet of printed paper from the surface of his desk. On the 15th of December in the year 2021, JD Vance commenced, his vocal tone remaining remarkably composed and conversational, reminiscent of a caring father reading a comforting evening tale to his children. A journalist presented you with an inquiry, a remarkably straightforward question regarding whether sitting members of the national legislature should be prohibited from engaging in the trading of corporate equities. The speaker's composed expression remained intact, yet her gaze involuntarily drifted toward the document held firmly in his grasp. You responded, and I am quoting your exact sentiment here. "No," he articulated, allowing a deliberate pause to let the gravity of that single syllable permeate the chamber. You elaborated by stating, "We operate within a free market economic system, and they should be afforded the right to participate in that system." Vance lowered the document to the table with deliberate slowness. He observed her with an expression akin to a patron watching an unpredictably generous mechanism devoid of visible anger, but rather colored by a profound sense of genuine astonishment. Your personal financial portfolio yielded a remarkable 65% return during the calendar year of 2023. Madam Speaker, 65%. Concurrently, the broader S&P 500 index yielded a return of merely 23%. Bridgewater Associates, recognized as the most expansive hedge fund operating within the borders of the United States of America, actually experienced a depreciation of capital. He reclined slightly against the leather backing of his seat. "I would venture to suggest that your participation in that market has been exceptionally fruitful." A collective murmur undulated through the viewing gallery, presenting as neither distinct amusement nor a dramatic gasp, but rather an ambiguous sound hovering somewhere in the interstitial space between the two. The presiding chairman's wooden gavel descended with a solitary, authoritative tap. The speaker's hands, which had previously been resting in a politely folded posture upon the table, gently parted and pressed themselves entirely flat against the polished wooden surface. Yet, this precise instance was not the true genesis of the narrative. This specific interaction, the exchange destined to be extracted, digitally disseminated, and viewed upwards of 14 million times prior to the stroke of midnight, represented the culmination of 6 hours of intricate procedural groundwork. To genuinely comprehend the weight of this juncture, one must mentally rewind to the early hours of that morning, when Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro Pelosi strode confidently into that legislative chamber, harboring the steadfast conviction that she had arrived to impart a profound lesson. She simply remained unaware that she was not destined to be the educator she had anticipated. The Russell Senate office building emanated its characteristic, timeless aroma, a nostalgic amalgamation of historic marble architecture, freshly brewed morning coffee, and the faint, chemically sweet fragrance of institutional floor polish. Room 325 had been meticulously organized since 6 o'clock in the morning. Technical crews representing the C-SPAN broadcasting network had already secured their optimal vantage points along the eastern perimeter of the room. Legislative aides navigated fluidly among the leather chairs, fine-tuning audio microphones, positioning crystal water glasses at mathematically precise intervals, and arranging official nameplates that the majority of the attending senators would habitually overlook. The Legislative Assembly was officially designated to discuss the Congressional Stock Trading and Financial Transparency Act. Senate Bill 4712, colloquially branded the Pelosi Act, constituted the formal legislative acronym preventing elected leaders from owning securities and investments. An innovative staff member within Senator Josh Hawley's office had conceptualized the clever title, and, to the senator's administrative credit, he had found humor in the suggestion for approximately 30 seconds before granting it his official endorsement. The proposed legislation enjoyed robust bipartisan backing, boasting a dozen enthusiastic co-sponsors, prominently including a first-term senator hailing from Ohio, legally identified as James David Vance. The Speaker made her official entrance at exactly 18 minutes prior to 10 o'clock. She navigated through the primary wooden doors, accompanied by an intimate entourage consisting of 4 essential personnel: a Director of Legislative Affairs, a Communications Specialist, an Executive Personal Assistant, and a dedicated security professional who strategically positioned himself near the exit without ever taking a seat. She moved with the deliberate grace that had become her signature, her chin elevated, her shoulders squared, exhibiting the purposeful stride of a public figure who intimately understood that every marble hallway within the nation's capital functioned as an expansive theatrical stage. The sitting members of the committee respectfully rose to their feet. The majority did so out of a sense of profound institutional reverence, others out of ingrained parliamentary habit, and perhaps one or two simply because their respective chiefs of staff had explicitly instructed them to adhere to the courtesy. "Madam Speaker," the presiding chairman announced into his microphone, "we extend our sincerest gratitude for your presence among us today." "Mr. Chairman," she warmly reciprocated, elegantly arranging herself within the designated witness chair. "It consistently remains a distinct privilege to visit the Senate chambers, even on occasions when your legislative proposals happen to bear my namesake." A ripple of polite, understated amusement traversed the room. She offered a gracious smile. She possessed a formidable mastery of these environments. She had been navigating these exact dynamics with unparalleled skill since the second administrative term of President Ronald Reagan. Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro was integrated into the fabric of political life in the identical manner that certain dynasties are born into generational wealth. Her patriarch had served as the esteemed mayor of Baltimore, a mantle later assumed by her own brother. The D'Alessandro family did not merely participate within the mechanics of the local democratic apparatus. They essentially functioned as the apparatus itself. She entered into matrimony with Paul Pelosi during the year 1963, subsequently relocated to the vibrant city of San Francisco, and successfully secured a representative seat within the United States House of Representatives in 1987. Now, 37 years into her tenure, she remained an unyielding fixture of the institution. Having wielded the Speaker's gavel on 2 separate occasions, she was widely recognized as the most influential female figure in the sprawling history of American governance. Within the private corridors of the Capitol, her colleagues occasionally referred to her as the Countess. Some used the moniker with deep admiration, while others employed it with a healthy degree of trepidation. Notably, no individual ever directed that particular title toward her in a face-to-face encounter. Her accumulated financial portfolio was publicly estimated to reside somewhere within the expansive range of $250 million to $400 million. Simultaneously, she drew an annual public servant's salary of $174,000 in her capacity as a congressional representative. The stark mathematical juxtaposition between those 2 specific financial figures served as the unspoken catalyst for everyone's presence within that room. She delicately adjusted the position of her microphone, smoothly opened a bound leather portfolio, and commenced the delivery of her prepared introductory remarks. Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of this committee, she articulated with clarity. I maintain a profound respect for the underlying intent propelling this proposed legislation. However, I have devoted nearly 4 decades of my life to the pursuit of public service, and throughout that extensive tenure, I have absorbed the critical lesson that noble intentions and effective, practical policy do not always align perfectly. Her vocal delivery was impeccably precise and entirely unhurried. Her calculating gaze swept methodically from one face to the next, not seeking validation, but rather quietly, assessing and tallying, exhibiting the ingrained reflexes of a legislative leader who had successfully secured more pivotal votes than any other living politician. The visionary founders of our republic fundamentally comprehended the immense value of cultivating a free market economy. The dedicated citizens who opt to serve within the mechanisms of government fundamentally remain citizens, naturally possessing the identical constitutional right to participate within our broader economic ecosystem as any other working American. She allowed for a deliberate pause, offering a faint, diplomatic smile. This particular piece of legislation happens to bear my name. I am acutely aware of that theatrical choice, yet we must acknowledge that a cleverly crafted acronym can never serve as a legitimate substitute for rigorous, thoughtful constitutional analysis. The statement was undeniably elegant. It was flawlessly practiced. It embodied the precise caliber of eloquent testimony that had successfully disarmed and neutralized aggressive congressional oversight committees for the better part of 40 years. Seated unobtrusively within the third elevated row of the dais, JD Vance maintained his position with a slender manila folder resting squarely in front of him. He refrained from opening the document during the entirety of the speaker's introductory address. He declined to jot down any preparatory notes. He merely absorbed her words, his head angled slightly toward the left, mirroring the exact analytical posture adopted by the esteemed professors at Yale Law School precisely before they systematically dismantled a student's core argument. He lacked the stereotypical visual presentation of a legacy senator. There existed an enduring quality within his facial features that appeared simultaneously more youthful and vastly more weathered than a man of 40 years. He possessed the distinct structural cheekbones characteristic of the Scots-Irish communities he had been raised alongside in Middletown, Ohio, coupled with the deeply ingrained, the watchful stillness of an individual who had comprehended at an incredibly tender age that the authoritative adults occupying his universe were fundamentally unreliable. His biological father had departed from the household while Vance was still wearing infant diapers. His mother navigated a tumultuous cycle of brief marriages and severe substance dependencies. There were 5 distinct husbands, accompanied by grueling years of struggling with heroin addiction. Consequently, he was primarily nurtured and raised by his resilient grandmother, Bonnie Vance, affectionately known to the entire community simply as Mamaw. She habitually transported a fully loaded revolver within the confines of her handbag. There was an infamous historical incident where she had poured combustible gasoline over her slumbering husband as a consequence of his excessive alcohol consumption. She ignited a match, yet ultimately extinguished the flames herself. She was perpetually the one tasked with extinguishing the metaphorical and literal fires. Mamaw nourished the young J.D. on government-issued processed cheese blocks and economical frozen banquet-brand dinners. She explicitly informed him, utilizing a colorful vocabulary capable of causing a seasoned military drill instructor to blush, that he was destined to escape the gravitational pull of Middletown, even if she was required to physically drag him away by the tips of his ears. Ultimately, he did orchestrate his escape. He navigated through the demanding ranks of the Marine Corps, excelled academically at Ohio State University, and secured a degree from Yale Law. He subsequently authored a deeply personal memoir entitled Hillbilly Elegy, a literary endeavor that propelled him to a level of national prominence sufficient to land him a seat within this highly exclusive room. Yet, despite the accolades and the titles, absolutely none of his subsequent achievements had successfully eradicated the lingering memory of government cheese from his palate. Mama passed away in the year 2005. Her completely liquidated estate carried a monetary value that equated to less than a negligible accounting rounding error on Paul Pelosi's annual tax filings. Now, her grown grandson occupied a chair in this prestigious hearing room, intently listening to the most consequential woman in American politics eloquently articulate why the stringent regulations she had personally helped draft ought not to apply to her own household. JD. Two senior senators were granted the privilege of presenting their inquiries first. They offered gentle, highly deferential questions concerning the philosophical nature of market participation, the nuances of fiduciary responsibility, and the broader constitutional liberties afforded to democratically elected officials. The Speaker addressed their prompts with the patient, soothing authority of a seasoned academic instructing a classroom of restless youths on the complexities of long division. At one specific juncture, she subtly pivoted her posture toward the elevated dais and stated, "Senator, I have actively served within this venerable institution for a duration that exceeds the entire lifespan of the gentleman representing Ohio." She deliberately delivered the remark as a testament to her unmatched credentials, a subtle yet unmistakable reinforcement of her hierarchical dominance. The corresponding smile that graced her features was entirely serene and slightly patronizing, projecting the quiet confidence of a diplomat who had historically stared down sitting commanders-in-chief without blinking. Vance methodically inscribed an observation onto a yellow legal pad. He did not lift his eyes to meet hers. The presiding chairman briefly consulted the digital clock mounted on the wall. "Senator Vance, you are allotted 15 minutes for your inquiries." Vance secured the cap onto his writing instrument and positioned it perfectly parallel to the edge of his manila folder. "I extend my thanks to you, Mr. Chairman." He directed his attention toward the Speaker, projecting an expression completely devoid of overt hostility, yet equally devoid of customary deference. It was an expression that a deeply analytical observer might have accurately classified as profound, unwavering curiosity. "I highly doubt I will require that entire allotment of time." Vance fluidly opened the cover of the manila folder. The interior contents amounted to fewer than a dozen standard pages. He brought no oversized poster boards, no dramatically enlarged visual aids. There was solely text printed on paper. "Madam Speaker," he initiated, his tone level. "In the month of April in the year 2020, my mother was actively navigating the fragile process of addiction recovery." The Speaker's pen immediately ceased its movement across her notepad. She had maintained her sobriety for approximately 1 full year, perhaps slightly longer. That milestone represented an incredibly significant achievement within the context of our family dynamic. 1 year of sobriety. We commemorated that occasion with the identical level of joyous reverence that most traditional families reserve for a birthday celebration, primarily because, speaking with complete candor, there were numerous extended periods where we genuinely doubted she would survive to see another year. He articulated his words with deliberate pacing. There was absolutely no theatricality embedded in his delivery. Or, if a performance was indeed present, it was the specific variety of storytelling that had been internally rehearsed so frequently that it had fundamentally merged with raw, unadulterated truth. She was diligently attending local Narcotics Anonymous meetings, committing to 3 sessions per week and occasionally 4. That supportive community functioned as her absolute lifeline. She confided in me on one specific occasion, stating, "JD, those meeting rooms are the exclusive environment where I am not forced to maintain the exhausting illusion that I am perfectly fine." He paused briefly, a momentary tightening visible along his jawline before it visibly relaxed. And subsequently, the global viral pandemic descended upon us. The specific municipal facility where she congregated for her vital meetings was abruptly shuttered. The state government issued the mandate. The county administration echoed the directive. The public health authorities spoke uniformly. They instructed everyone to remain isolated at home. They issued a universal decree. My mother contacted me late one evening via telephone. She expressed, "JD, I am terrified. I am entirely alone within this apartment, and I am profoundly scared." And I found myself entirely at a loss for words, because how exactly does one comfort an individual who has been desperately treading water for the entirety of her existence, only to discover that the single functional lifeboat she finally managed to secure has been forcibly hoisted entirely out of the water? The grand hearing room was engulfed in a remarkably profound silence. During that exact same calendar week, specifically on April the 14th of 2020, you made a widely broadcast appearance on a national television program, specifically The Late Late Show, hosted by James Corden. You were broadcasting directly from the luxurious confines of your personal kitchen situated in San Francisco. Vance calmly retrieved a single sheet of paper from his organized folder. You elected to showcase your private residence to the American public. The presentation heavily featured two expansive Sub-Zero brand refrigerator and freezer units, positioned side by side. The standard retail acquisition cost for that specific pairing sits at approximately $24,000. He articulated the financial figure using the exact same cadence he applied to the rest of his narrative, utterly devoid of dramatic inflection. The sheer magnitude of the number achieved its intended impact independently. You proceeded to open the primary freezer compartment. It was abundantly stocked with Jenny's brand ice cream. For those who may not be intimately familiar with the consumer market, Jenny's represents an ultra-premium tier brand. Typically retailing at $13 for a single pint, he gently rested the document back onto the desk surface. And you explicitly stated, and I am providing a verbatim quotation here, Madam Speaker, "I genuinely do not know what I would have possibly done if ice cream had not been invented." From an undetermined location within the public viewing gallery, an audible, heavy exhalation broke the tension. During that precise week, the exact same 7-day span where you uttered that sentiment, an estimated 40 million American citizens had abruptly lost their primary sources of employment. 40 million individuals. The national unemployment rate skyrocketed to 14.7%, representing the most severe economic contraction experienced since the era of the Great Depression. He allowed each subsequent statement to land with distinct, separated gravity, delivering them as short, unadorned facts, striking like hammered nails. Vulnerable populations were enduring hours of standing in disorganized queues at regional food banks, frequently accompanied by their young children, huddled in unsheltered parking lots while enduring freezing rain. And during that exact same week, the heavily relied upon federal Paycheck Protection Program entirely depleted its available funding. $350 billion had vanished. Small, independent commercial enterprises across the breadth of the nation were shuttering their doors permanently. And when congressional Republicans initiated an effort to inject an additional $250 billion to replenish that vital safety net, you utilized your authority to block the measure. You, Madam Speaker, you, in your personal capacity, you orchestrated the holding of that critical floor vote. And immediately following that legislative maneuver, you appeared on a televised broadcast and presented your premium ice cream collection to a struggling nation. The speaker perceptibly straightened her posture within her chair. Senator, the Paycheck Protection Program contained deeply significant structural flaws that disproportionately favored massive corporate entities over. I have not yet posed a question to you, Madam Speaker, the senator interjected. The words were delivered with a quiet, almost shockingly gentle tone, yet the entire room absorbed the percussive impact of the interruption. Vance turned over the subsequent page of his materials. 4 months later in the timeline, August the 31st of 2020, located in San Francisco, You secured an appointment at a local hairstyling salon, legally registered as eSalon SF, to receive a cosmetic wash and blowout service. Professional salons operating within the jurisdiction of San Francisco had been legally mandated to remain closed since the month of March. That equates to 5 full months of government-enforced operational shutdown, dictated strictly by local public health ordinances. Professional stylists were prohibited from earning wages. Salon proprietors possessed zero revenue to fulfill their lease obligations. They were in the agonizing process of losing their entire livelihoods. Yet, you confidently walked through those doors. The interior security monitoring system successfully recorded your passage through the establishment's floor plan, displaying wet hair and notably lacking any form of facial covering. He retrieved another printed page, reading directly from its contents. Your assigned stylist, the individual walking in close proximity behind you, was fully compliant in wearing a protective mask. You were decidedly not. Let us analyze the context. This occurred during the precise historical window when you unilaterally required every single elected member of the United States House of Representatives to wear a facial covering while present on the chamber floor. You mandated the usage of masks during all committee proceedings. You aggressively enforced mask mandates throughout the sprawling hallways of the Capitol building. You vigorously championed the implementation of proxy voting procedures to ensure members would not be compelled to risk travel during the height of the global pandemic. You unilaterally drafted and implemented the overarching rules. And subsequently, you openly defied them. The speaker leaned forcefully toward her microphone, her vocal timbre turning distinctly crisp. It was the unmistakable tone of an authoritative figure who had internally determined that this line of inquiry had progressed far beyond acceptable boundaries. Senator, I am compelled to address this directly because you are actively painting a highly distorted and historically inaccurate picture. The management of that specific salon explicitly informed my scheduling staff that they were operating entirely within the permitted parameters of San Francisco's complex health guidelines. I attended that appointment, operating strictly under an assumption of good faith. When it eventually became apparent that the operational reality of the situation had been grossly misrepresented to my office, I immediately stepped forward and accepted full public responsibility for the occurrence, an action which frankly represents a far greater degree of accountability than the vast majority of individuals occupying this building are willing to demonstrate. Vance offered a slow, measured nod of his head. I genuinely appreciate that sentiment, Madam Speaker. You assert that you took responsibility. Allow me to illuminate for the American populace the exact methodology you employed when taking that responsibility. He elegantly lifted the subsequent page from his stack. When the security footage was released to the press, you convened an emergency media conference. During that address, you stated, and I quote, "It was a deliberate setup. I take full responsibility for mistakenly trusting the word of a neighborhood salon establishment." He raised his gaze from the paper. And immediately following that, you stated, and I want the American citizens to absorb this with absolute clarity. I firmly believe that this particular salon owes me a formal apology for orchestrating a setup against me. He returned the document to the table with agonizing slowness. You aggressively demanded that a struggling small business apologize to you. The proprietor of that salon, a woman legally named Erica Kias, had devoted 12 years of her life to operating within that community. She had been forced to accept a modest $12,000 Paycheck Protection Program loan, the identical federal program that you actively blocked from receiving vital supplementary funding simply to insure her. Municipal utilities remained active. Following the public dissemination of the video footage, her life descended into chaos. She became the target of severe, credible threats to her physical safety. Her digital business profiles were inundated with thousands of coordinated, artificially low ratings. She tragically confessed to a prominent journalist, "I genuinely do not believe I can safely remain in San Francisco anymore." A dedicated entrepreneur who had painstakingly built an enterprise, consistently employed local stylists, diligently paid her civic taxes, and meticulously played by every single regulatory rule you ever championed. She was ultimately forced to abandon her chosen city simply because she provided the unfiltered truth regarding your actions. And you? You seamlessly returned to your duties at the Capitol the very next week. You faced zero institutional consequences. There was no ethics investigation. You were assessed no monetary fines. Nothing occurred. The rules simply failed to apply to your person. A heavy, unbroken silence blanketed the room. Vance eventually closed the page. When he resumed speaking, his vocal register had dropped significantly, projecting not an increase in volume, but a closer, more grounded resonance. It was the authentic voice of a citizen who was absolutely not feigning theatrical outrage, but rather meticulously describing a structural reality he had observed his entire life. My late grandmother possessed a specific colloquial phrase for individuals who operate in that manner. She would frequently observe, "Certain folks operate under the illusion that the rules are exclusively drafted for other people." He offered a brief, fleeting half-smile. Mama would have undoubtedly harbored an extensive monologue regarding the concept of $13 ice cream. He methodically advanced to the subsequent section of his organized folder. Now, let us transition to discussing matters exponentially more expensive than premium frozen desserts. Madam Speaker, I would request your patience as I walk through a chronological timeline with you. We will focus strictly on verifiable dates and documented dollar amounts. I firmly believe the American voting public deserves the opportunity to hear this sequence of events presented in proper, sequential order. The speaker had successfully reclaimed a significant portion of her legendary composure. She adjusted her posture to sit remarkably straight, gently repositioning her signature pearls. The polite smile had entirely vanished, yet her formidable poise remained an unshakable fortress, fueled by the deeply ingrained muscle memory forged through thousands of hostile press conferences, thousands of aggressive interrogations, and thousands of high-stakes moments where the unblinking cameras were fixated upon her. And Nancy Pelosi had famously refused to flinch. "You may certainly proceed, Senator," she replied, her voice remaining exceptionally steady. "I possess absolutely nothing to conceal from this committee." "Excellent." Vance procured a newly printed page. This specific document was densely populated with numerical data, an overwhelming volume of digits. Let us commence the timeline on the 17th of June within the year 2022. On that highly specific date, your legally wedded husband, Paul Pelosi, successfully exercised 200 sophisticated financial call options heavily tied to the Nvidia Corporation. That complex financial maneuver legally granted him the exclusive right to acquire 20,000 individual shares of their stock at a predetermined strike price, resting at exactly $100 per unit. He paused deliberately, casting his gaze across the faces of the committee members before momentarily locking eyes directly with the broadcast camera lens. It mirrored the precise manner in which a neighbor might gaze across a dividing fence right before disclosing a vital piece of information that simply must be heard. For the benefit of our citizens watching these proceedings from their homes, the Nvidia Corporation fundamentally manufactures advanced computer microchips. These are the highly sophisticated components integrated into your cellular devices, deployed within military-grade drones, and foundational to the development of artificial intelligence. During the month of June in 2022, Nvidia was widely recognized as one of the most highly valued corporate entities on the face of the earth. And on that exact day, June the 17th, your husband executed a highly leveraged, speculative wager, utilizing complex call options carrying a monetary value fluctuating between $1 and $5 million, predicting that the value of Nvidia stock was poised for a dramatic upward trajectory. That specific action does not resemble a traditional, conservative contribution to a retirement portfolio. That is precisely the aggressive strategy implemented by seasoned Wall Street traders when they possess an overwhelming, almost absolute level of confidence regarding an impending market movement. He smoothly redirected his attention back toward the speaker's seat. Now, I must ask, what specific piece of legislation was the United States Congress actively developing during that exact same month? The speaker's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Senator, the Congress is perpetually engaged in developing a great multitude of the CHIPS Act, Vance interjected smoothly, a monumental legislative package containing $52 billion in targeted federal subsidies exclusively earmarked for corporate entities that manufacture advanced computer microchips. He dragged out the pronunciation of the final two words to maximize their resonance. Your spouse placed a multi-million-dollar speculative wager on a prominent microchip corporation, while you, operating in your supreme capacity as the Speaker of the House, were aggressively shepherding a $52 billion legislative subsidy specifically designed to enrich the microchip industry. He listed the following dates with rhythmic precision. July the 14th, the mandatory financial disclosure form officially enters the public domain. The American public becomes aware of the transaction. July the 26th, facing mounting public pressure, your husband abruptly liquidates his entire position, shedding all 25,000 shares and absorbing a nominal financial loss. July the 28th, you successfully secure the passage of the CHIPS Act through the chamber anyway. He casually set the document onto his desk. Now, a casual observer might logically conclude, he accepted a financial loss. Therefore, the investigative case is officially closed. He offered a smile, though it completely lacked any trace of warmth. Except, the case definitively refused to remain closed. Fast forward to November of 2023. The intense media scrutiny has naturally subsided. The frenetic news cycle has transitioned to alternative controversies. And your spouse, Paul Pelosi, confidently strolls right back into the exact same metaphorical casino. He acquires 50 brand-new Nvidia call options. The estimated value of that transaction sits at $1.88 million. By the midpoint of the year 2024, those strategically timed options had ballooned in value to an astonishing $5.83 million. He successfully generated approximately $4 million in pure profit, betting on the exact same corporate stock, tied to the exact same corporate entity which had directly benefited from the exact same legislative package that you successfully passed. He allowed the stark reality of the mathematics to perform its own heavy lifting within the room. $4 million generated from a corporate entity his wife had actively assisted in subsidizing using public taxpayer funds. The silence that saturated the hearing room had fundamentally ceased to be polite. It had morphed into the heavy, calculating silence of dozens of individuals simultaneously performing basic mental arithmetic. But the Nvidia scenario did not stand as an isolated incident. Vance methodically extracted yet another page from his reserve. July the 1st of 2024. Your spouse liquidates 2,000 shares of Visa stock. The estimated financial value of that transaction ranges securely between $500,000 and $1 million, September the 24th, 2024. The United States Department of Justice officially initiates a massive antitrust lawsuit directly targeting Visa, explicitly accusing the corporation of engaging in illegal monopolistic practices within the broader debit card market. Visa's corporate stock plummets by 5.5% over the course of a single trading day. Your husband miraculously managed to sell his extensive holdings exactly 2 months before the federal government launched its devastating legal assault. He physically held the paper up for visual inspection. But here is the specific juncture where the pattern becomes truly fascinating. December of 2022. Your husband liquidates 30,000 shares of Alphabet, the parent company of Google. Exactly 1 month later, In January of 2023, the Department of Justice launches a sweeping antitrust lawsuit against Google, citing severe violations. He placed the paper down and methodically folded his hands together. We are examining two entirely distinct corporate entities, two entirely different calendar years, two massive, distinct lawsuits filed by the Department of Justice. And on both identical occasions, your spouse managed to successfully liquidate his financial position mere weeks or months before the federal government launched its devastating legal action. He permitted the undeniable weight of the established pattern to settle heavily over the gathered assembly. I want to ensure that every single citizen listening at home fully comprehends exactly what we are observing here. This discussion is not centered around a single, isolated trade. This is not an investigation into one incredibly fortunate guess. This constitutes a deeply established pattern. Your husband acquires equity in a major semiconductor corporation. You subsequently pass a massive semiconductor subsidy bill. Your husband liquidates equity in a massive payments corporation. The federal government subsequently sues that exact payments corporation. Your husband liquidates equity in a dominant search engine corporation. The federal government subsequently sues that exact search engine corporation. On every single recorded occasion, the Pelosi family miraculously finds themselves positioned on the highly profitable side of the financial transaction. On every single recorded occasion, the American tax-paying public remains the absolute last entity to be informed. Now, I am fully aware that your dedicated communications team possesses a carefully crafted, pre-prepared statement to address this exact phenomenon. I have personally read its contents, published in at least a dozen major news periodicals. The official statement reads, and I quote, "Speaker Pelosi does not personally own any corporate stocks, and she possesses absolutely no prior knowledge of or subsequent involvement in any of her husband's financial transactions." He lingered on the specific phrasing, "no prior knowledge." That represents the critical phrase here. No prior knowledge. Madam Speaker, the esteemed television personality Martha Stewart was sentenced to serve time in a federal penitentiary. She went to prison explicitly for providing false statements regarding a stock transaction that ultimately saved her a comparatively meager sum of approximately $45,000. $45,000. Meanwhile, your immediate family has successfully generated tens of millions of dollars, executing trades that miraculously happen to precede major, unannounced government actions. And the official explanation provided is simply no prior knowledge. With all due respect, if your husband genuinely operates with zero prior knowledge of your legislative agenda, then he is not merely a highly competent investor. He stands as the single greatest intuitive investor in the entire recorded history of the United States of America. He demonstrates instincts superior to Warren Buffett. He outperforms every highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar predictive algorithm operating on Wall Street. Either that absolute miracle is true, or he had access to privileged information. The speaker's voice sliced through the tension, remarkably sharp and flawlessly controlled, projecting the terrifying poise of a leader who had routinely stared down hostile foreign dignitaries without a single flinch. "Senator, I have remained seated here and patiently listened, as you meticulously constructed an incredibly elaborate narrative. Allow me to offer you several grounding facts in return. My husband has operated as an immensely successful financial investor for a period exceeding 40 years. This predates my ascension to the position of Speaker by decades. This predates any of the contemporary events you have referenced. He was actively managing complex financial portfolios before you were even born into this world. The entities you reference are publicly traded corporations. Millions of ordinary American citizens freely trade their equities every single day. And the offensive implication that a woman who has dedicated the entirety of her adult life to the rigorous pursuit of public service must be subjected to having her family's private financial decisions weaponized against her within. The context of a senatorial committee hearing. She leaned aggressively forward toward the microphone. Represents exactly the specific variety of toxic, highly partisan theatricality that systematically causes the American electorate to rapidly lose their remaining faith in the integrity of this institution. The massive chamber collectively suspended its breathing. It was undeniably the most potent 30 seconds of rhetorical defense she had delivered during the entire afternoon. For a fleeting moment, the aura of the Countess had returned in full force. Vance offered a slow, almost respectful nod of acknowledgement. "Madam Speaker, I genuinely appreciate that defense. I truly do. It is an undeniable fact that your husband has been engaged in professional investing for over 40 years. That is objectively true." He allowed a pregnant pause to develop. However, throughout those initial 40 years of active investing, his overall portfolio never once yielded a staggering 65% return. That unprecedented level of success did not manifest until you officially assumed the powerful role of Speaker. It is also undeniably true that millions of everyday citizens trade these identical stocks. Yet, those millions of everyday citizens do not consistently manage to beat the returns of every major professional hedge fund operating within the United States. Your family's private portfolio returned an astounding 65% in 2023. The broader S&P 500 index returned 23%. Bridgewater Associates, famously recognized as the largest operational hedge fund in the nation, directed by several of the most brilliant financial minds currently walking the earth, actually lost capital during that exact same period. In the subsequent year of 2024, your returns hit 71%. During the initial 6 months of 2025, your family secured an additional $8.8 million. He calmly settled back into his leather chair. 40 years of active investing experience, and, miraculously, the absolute best years. The specific years that successfully generated hundreds of millions of dollars in wealth for your family just happened to perfectly align with the exact years during which you held supreme authority over determining which specific bills were permitted to reach the voting floor of the United States House of Representatives. He paused once more, allowing the implication to solidify. There are only two logical conclusions. Either your husband magically transformed into the most naturally gifted investor in the history of the American financial apparatus, superior to Warren Buffett, superior to every supercomputer on Wall Street, or he was operating with the benefit of internal assistance. The Speaker's hands were now planted firmly, entirely flat upon the wooden surface of the table. The brilliant overhead lighting aggressively caught the reflection of her numerous rings. The working folks residing in my home district possess a highly specific term to describe this phenomenon, Madam Speaker. They do not refer to it as a free market. He let the silence hang heavily. They refer to it as rigged. The atmosphere within the gallery shifted palpably. An uncomfortable cough echoed from a rear corner. The wooden joints of a chair creaked audibly under sudden pressure. The distinct, unified scratching of 20 reporters' pens frantically meeting 20 notepads resonated throughout the space simultaneously. Vance cast his gaze downward toward the contents of his folder, subsequently raising his eyes to meet the Speaker's direct stare. "That represents an incredible quantity of premium ice cream, Madam Speaker." He deliberately turned over another page. "However, let us now transition to discussing exactly what occurs when the supposed free market legal system comes calling for members of your own family." The intrinsic nature of the hearing room had fundamentally transformed. It no longer resembled the identical space it had been a mere 2 hours prior, back when the Speaker had confidently strode in, accompanied by her entourage, wearing her signature pearls, and exuding the unshakable certainty of a political titan who had never once been successfully outmaneuvered upon the treacherous terrain of Capitol Hill. The elegant pearl necklace remained firmly in place. The tailored Chanel suit still appeared completely immaculate. Yet, An imperceptible shift had occurred deep behind her eyes, resembling the subtle way a structural edifice appears superficially unchanged. Immediately following a seismic event, right up until the exact moment, the observer finally notices the jagged fissure actively traveling up the primary foundation. The high-powered defense attorney, seated strategically over her right shoulder, had anxiously leaned forward and attempted to whisper a cautionary message into her ear. She had instantly waved him away with a sharp, dismissive flick of her wrist. It was the deeply ingrained gesture of a fiercely independent woman, who absolutely refused to accept outside assistance, who had historically never required such intervention, and who simply could not afford to project the visual appearance that she was faltering. Not in this specific setting. Not while the television cameras continued to broadcast live. When I was 17 years of age, Vance resumed, a close childhood companion of mine from Middletown was arrested for operating a vehicle under the influence. The tonal shift within his delivery was instantaneous and profound. The aggressive, methodical prosecutor had suddenly vanished. In his place sat the reflective young man hailing from the Rust Belt of Ohio, the individual who had painstakingly authored a literary memoir detailing the immense struggles of his specific origins, because he found it impossible to cease thinking about the desperate people he had ultimately left behind. His given name was Kevin. He was employed working the demanding second shift at the local Armco steel manufacturing plant. He was inherently not a malicious individual. He simply consumed a few too many beverages at a local tavern following an exhausting shift at the mill. It is a tragic mistake that occasionally happens. He was subsequently pulled over by local law enforcement while traveling down Route 4. He submitted to a breathalyzer examination and registered a blood alcohol concentration of 9, placing him just marginally above the strict legal limit. He consequently suffered the immediate revocation of his driver's license. Now, in a place like Middletown, Ohio, if an individual loses their ability to legally drive, they simultaneously lose their employment. This occurs because there are no municipal bus routes running to the plant. There is absolutely no subterranean subway system to rely upon. There is simply you, your personal vehicle, and the mandatory 20-minute commute down the highway to reach the factory floor. That encompasses the entirety of the transportation infrastructure. Kevin lost his factory job. His frustrated wife subsequently packed up their young children and relocated to her mother's residence, situated in Dayton. The final update I received regarding his situation indicated he was residing in a dilapidated mobile home located off Lebanon Road. One single DUI infraction, a registration of 9, and his entire existence was effectively eradicated. Vance locked his gaze directly onto the speaker. May the 28th, in the year 2022, at approximately 10:26 inches the evening, located within the affluent confines of Napa County, California. Your legally wedded husband was actively operating a luxury 2021 model Porsche 911 automobile. He was in the process of traversing State Route 29 near the community of Oakville. At that time, a separate vehicle, a Jeep, violently collided with his sports car. The impact resulted in major, highly destructive collision damage being inflicted upon both automobiles involved. When the responding officers from the California Highway Patrol finally arrived at the chaotic scene, they formally observed, and I am reading verbatim from the official CHP incident report, that your husband presented with red, watery eyes, appeared notably unsteady on his feet, exhibited significantly slurred speech patterns, and projected a remarkably strong odor of an alcoholic beverage emanating directly from his breath. The officers on site proceeded to administer a standard field sobriety examination. The finalized official report explicitly states that your spouse was physically incapable of raising 1 foot off the pavement and verbally counting, without being forced to physically grab onto the side of the patrol cruiser to maintain his physical balance. The The supervising officer actually instructed him to cease attempting the physical maneuvers because, and I quote the report directly, "I do not feel at all comfortable having you continue to perform this physical test. I harbor deep concerns regarding the high potential of you falling over onto the pavement and inflicting a serious injury upon yourself." His officially recorded blood alcohol content registered at 82. The maximum legal limit within the state of California stands precisely at. Vance allowed for a brief, heavy pause. "Now, here is the specific detail that my childhood friend Kevin would find absolutely fascinating." He deliberately picked up another sheet of printed paper. "When the responding highway patrol officer formally requested that your husband produce his state-issued driver's license, Mr. Pelosi purposefully handed the officer something entirely supplemental. He produced a physical card, specifically a membership card affiliated with the 1199 Foundation. For those unaware, the 1199 Foundation operates as a highly exclusive charitable organization directly affiliated with the California Highway Patrol apparatus. If a wealthy citizen contributes a sufficiently massive financial donation to the organization, they are quietly awarded a physical membership card. And when a citizen deliberately hands that specific card to a patrol officer during the middle of a tense traffic stop, that citizen is non-verbally communicating something incredibly specific to the authorities. The activated dash camera mounted on the police cruiser successfully captured the responding officer's direct verbal response to being handed this card, and I intend to read his exact phrasing out loud. Vance read the words with agonizing slowness. "I will quietly discuss this situation with my superior supervisors to determine exactly what they might be willing to do, simply because we are fully aware that you are a highly high-profile individual." He allowed the paper to float back down to the desk. "Because we are fully aware that you are a highly high-profile individual, my friend Kevin, struggling in Middletown, did not possess a magical 1199 VIP card. He solely possessed a standard-issue Ohio State driver's license and a heavily rusted pickup truck showing over 200,000 miles on the odometer. Your wealthy spouse, having been officially charged with the serious crime of operating a vehicle under the influence and actively causing physical injury, ultimately entered a formal plea of guilty to the court. He was officially sentenced to serve exactly 5 days within the confines of a county jail facility." Vance raised his right hand into the air and began to aggressively count off the specific conditions using his fingers. He was generously awarded 2 days of immediate credit for time he had ostensibly already served. He was subsequently granted an additional 2 days of credit entirely removed for exhibiting supposed good behavior. And that final, remaining solitary day of incarceration was miraculously converted into a requirement to complete a mere 8 hours of community service. A 5-day jail sentence was effectively magically transformed into an 8-hour mild inconvenience. Furthermore, your husband was legally ordered to install an ignition interlock security device onto his luxury vehicle for a mandatory duration of 1 year. That device essentially functions as a breathalyzer mechanism directly hardwired into the steering column. He was forced to provide a completely clean breath sample before the engine would even attempt to start. It resembles the restrictions placed upon a reckless teenager operating with a temporary learner's permit. Except, of course, the hypothetical teenager in question did not completely total a luxury Porsche automobile while under the influence. He was also formally ordered to submit payments totaling approximately $7,000 to cover various fines and victim restitution. $7,000. He allowed the precise monetary figure to hang in the air for a deeply uncomfortable moment. "Madam Speaker, your family's privately held net worth is currently estimated to sit at well over $250 million. Several aggressive financial analysts actually place that figure closer to $400 million. Let us choose to be highly generous for the sake of argument and simply call it $250 million. A penalty of $7,000 levied against an accumulated net worth of $250 million calculates to allow me to briefly perform the mathematics for the record, precisely 0.0028% of your total wealth. That absolutely does not even qualify as a standard rounding error. That is essentially the rounding error applied to a totally separate rounding error. My working-class companion Kevin, registering a 009, permanently lost his driver's license, instantly lost his sole source of income, saw his marriage violently dissolve, and was tragically separated from his young children. Your incredibly wealthy husband, registering a 0082, operating a luxury Porsche, flashing an exclusive VIP charity card, dealing with an accommodating officer who openly discussed what exceptional favors they could possibly manage for a high-profile person, was sentenced to a theoretical 5 days in jail that miraculously evaporated into 8 hours of light community service. And exactly 2 months following the resolution of that disaster, he was happily back to aggressively trading millions of dollars within the highly volatile stock market. He allowed the absolute silence of the chamber to hold its grip. That represents the true nature of the free market, Madam Speaker. That is exclusively your version of the free market. An entirely bifurcated system where a struggling factory worker hailing from Middletown permanently loses every single aspect of his life over a 9, while an astronomically wealthy aristocrat residing in the exclusive enclaves of Pacific Heights receives a mere 8 hours of inconvenience for a 82. The speaker's vocal response was laced with pure, uncompromising ice. Senator, the legal matter involving my husband was fully and properly adjudicated within the established confines of a legitimate court of law. He was formally charged by the authorities. He voluntarily pleaded guilty to the offenses. He was subsequently sentenced by an impartial judge. The judicial system functioned exactly according to its designed architectural parameters. And I find it deeply, profoundly inappropriate that you would choose to exploit a family member's highly private personal matter. A highly private personal matter, Vance repeated the phrase, letting the words roll slowly off his tongue. Madam Speaker, the tragic DUI that destroyed Kevin's life was also fundamentally a deeply personal matter. The glaring, inescapable difference is that absolutely nobody stood on the side of a highway and openly discussed with their ranking supervisors exactly what exceptional favors they were willing to provide for Kevin. He methodically closed that particular section of his dense folder and fluidly opened the final remaining flap, all of which inevitably brings my line of inquiry directly back to the exact location where we commenced this afternoon. December the 15th of the year 2021. A journalist approaches you and asks an incredibly simple, direct question. Should sitting members of the United States Congress be legally banned from trading corporate stocks? You confidently answered, no. You explicitly stated, and while I have previously recited this exact quote into the record, I feel absolutely compelled to read it aloud one final time, primarily because I deeply believe the American public desperately needs to hear the exact phrasing one more time. We operate within a free market economic system, and they should be afforded the right to participate in that system. During the year 2021, there were multiple, highly serious legislative bills actively circulating on Capitol Hill, designed specifically to permanently ban the controversial practice of congressional stock trading. These were broadly bipartisan bills. We witnessed progressive Democrats and conservative Republicans actually working together in unison, a phenomenon that occurs with incredibly rare frequency within the polarized confines of this city. Senator Ossoff, a Democrat representing Georgia. Senator Hawley, a Republican representing Missouri. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Representative Chip Roy. Every single one of those ideologically diverse individuals looked at the situation and universally declared, This unethical practice simply must cease. And you, wielding the supreme authority of the Speaker of the House, you did not merely verbally oppose their efforts. You actively, systematically blocked their legislation from advancing. You maintained absolute control over the legislative calendar. You unilaterally decided exactly which bills were permitted to reach the chamber floor for a vote. And these specific reform bills, bills carrying immense bipartisan support, the bills that 70 to 80% of the broader American public desperately desired to see, enacted into law, never once saw the glorious light of day. You did not simply exercise your right to say no. You structurally ensured that absolutely nobody else possessed the opportunity to say yes. JD, the online phenomenon known as the Nancy Pelosi stock tracker rapidly evolved into one of the single most heavily followed financial accounts across all major social media platforms. Everyday retail investors began meticulously copying your husband's personal trading strategies and successfully generating massive profits. There currently exists an entirely functional ETF, an exchange-traded fund, operating within the real market, that bears a ticker symbol explicitly named after you. It exclusively tracks the stock trades executed by congressional Democrats. It has consistently, massively outperformed the broader market. Finally, in the year 2022, cracking under the immense weight of intense public pressure, you abruptly announced to the world that you had undergone a change of heart. You confidently informed the gathered reporters that you would suddenly support strong legislation designed to restrict congressional stock trading. The resulting media headlines were incredibly generous to your legacy. Pelosi reverses course. Speaker embraces sweeping reform. Yet, remarkably, absolutely no such restrictive bill ever actually materialized on the voting floor. In 2023, your personal portfolio generated a return of 65%. In 2024, it generated 71%. In 2025, you officially announced your impending retirement from public service. You publicly stated you would not actively seek re-election to your seat. And then, suddenly, quite miraculously, after 37 highly profitable years, you suddenly fully supported the implementation of a comprehensive stock trading ban. He paused deliberately. Because, naturally, you have already successfully secured your fortune. The working folks residing back in my home district possess a highly specific term for that exact behavior as well, Madam Speaker. They do not refer to it as a free market. They do not even classify it merely as simple hypocrisy. They recognize it exactly for what it is, violently pulling up the ladder immediately after you have successfully finished climbing to the top. JD, the Speaker aggressively opened her mouth to launch a fierce rebuttal. Vance gently raised his hand. It was not a sharp, aggressive movement. It was not a gesture meant to dominate. It was simply the slow, deliberate elevation of an open palm. I am not quite finished speaking, Madam Speaker. I possess exactly one final thought to articulate to you today, and I deeply desire for you to absorb the entirety of it. The energetic frequency of the hearing room had permanently altered. For the preceding hour, JD Vance had operated as a relentless, methodical prosecutor, flawlessly precise, meticulously constructing an undeniable case, stacking metaphorical bricks side by side, utilizing exact dates, massive dollar amounts, and devastating direct quotations. His manila folder was now completely empty. The various pages he had systematically read from were now spread haphazardly across the surface of his wooden desk, displayed in the exact chronological order he had deployed them, resembling a winning hand of playing cards triumphantly laid face up on a casino table. However, a profound shift occurred the moment he physically closed the empty folder. He did not immediately reach forward to grasp another supplementary document. He completely ceased shuffling his remaining papers. He deliberately pushed the entire empty folder toward the far edge of his desk, moving it as distantly away from his physical person as his arms could possibly reach without forcing him to stand upright. And when he finally pivoted his body back to face the center of the room, his hands were entirely empty. That specific visual, the deliberate emptying of his hands, would become the definitive image that the public would vividly recall long after the event concluded. They would remember it far more clearly than the intricate Nvidia trading timeline, or the suspicious Visa divestment pattern, or even the egregious details of the DUI incident. They would forever remember the exact moment when JD Vance voluntarily set aside all the physical evidence and chose to speak directly from his heart, holding absolutely nothing in his hands. The speaker watched him intently. Her facial expression remained rigidly composed. It was the heavily fortified composure forged over 37 brutal years in politics, the specific variety of armor that eventually becomes deeply structural, functioning much like the critical load-bearing walls hidden within a historic architectural structure. Yet, her hands had remained completely frozen upon the surface of the table for several long minutes. Her high-priced defense attorney had anxiously leaned forward on 2 separate occasions to intervene, and on both occasions, she had steadfastly refused to even turn her head to acknowledge his presence. Up in the public viewing gallery, an unidentified woman seated in the second row was quietly weeping. She had not vocalized the reason for her tears, and absolutely no one present felt compelled to ask her to explain. When Vance finally resumed speaking, the very nature of his voice had fundamentally transformed. It was noticeably quieter, moving at a significantly slower pace. It carried the specific, heavy cadence of an individual who was fundamentally no longer attempting to win a legal argument, but was instead finally vocalizing a profound burden he had silently carried for an incredibly long time. It mirrored the exact sensation of carrying a heavy, jagged stone deep within your pocket for years, only to finally discover the appropriate, sacred location to lay it permanently to rest. You articulated a specific sentiment earlier this afternoon that deeply resonated with me, Madam Speaker. You confidently stated that you have actively served within this venerable institution for a duration that exceeds my entire time on this earth. And you are entirely correct in that assessment. You have, indeed. You have occupied a seat in the United States Congress continuously since the year 1987. I was a mere 3 years old when you first took your oath of office. And throughout those expansive 37 years, your family's accumulated net worth magically expanded from a standard congressional salary into a massive fortune exceeding $250 million. Certain financial estimates actually place the figure closer to $400 million. I genuinely do not know which specific number represents the absolute truth. Frankly, I highly doubt anyone besides your accountants truly does. But I know this fundamental reality to be true. Your officially stated annual salary, operating as a member of Congress, currently stands at $174,000. During the years you commanded the Speaker's gavel, that figure rose to $223,000. An individual simply does not accumulate $250 million relying solely upon that specific salary, not over the course of 37 years, not over the course of 370 years. The basic mathematical equation fundamentally fails to compute unless an unseen secondary mechanism is aggressively operating in the background. He allowed the room to sit in total silence for a heavy moment. But that is precisely not the topic I truly wish to discuss right now. He rotated his chair slightly, adjusting his angle so he was no longer facing the speaker directly, but was instead looking directly into the primary broadcast camera, seemingly speaking directly to the millions of citizens watching from their living rooms. I wish to spend a moment talking about my late grandmother. Her given name was Bonnie Blanton Vance. The entire community affectionately referred to her as Mamaw. She was born into extreme poverty in Jackson, Kentucky, deep within the isolated hollers of eastern Appalachia. She was forced to relocate to Middletown, Ohio, at the tender age of 13, simply because her desperate family received word that there might be manual labor jobs available at the local steel mill. She married incredibly young. She bore children incredibly young. She labored endlessly as a waitress in a roadside diner. She labored in a public laundromat. She routinely worked punishing double shifts, simply because the wages from a single shift failed to adequately cover the basic utility bills. When my biological mother proved fundamentally incapable of caring for me, which unfortunately represented the vast majority of my childhood, Maman instantly stepped in. She single-handedly raised me, relying heavily upon government-issued cheese. He articulated the specific words with immense care, utilizing the precise reverence one employs when speaking of an artifact that still carries profound emotional weight: government cheese. I am certain that several individuals in this room know exactly what that commodity is. It is distributed inside a stark, brown cardboard box, completely devoid of colorful marketing, featuring only utilitarian black lettering. There is no premium brand name. There is no recognizable corporate logo. It merely displays the stark words, "Processed American Cheese," printed in bold black ink. It arrives as a solid, 2-pound block, tightly wrapped in cheap, clear plastic film. When you attempt to unwrap it, the substance inherently sticks to your bare fingers. It absolutely does not taste like traditional cheese, not in the manner that actual cheese is supposed to taste. It is aggressively soft, overly salty, and possesses a distinctly rubbery texture. And if you accidentally leave it sitting out on the counter for too long, it begins to visibly sweat, releasing a strange, orange-tinted oil that stubbornly stains absolutely everything it touches. But you eat it anyway. You consume it eagerly. You eat it pressed between 2 slices of cheap white bread. You eat it melted vigorously over inexpensive macaroni from a cardboard box. You consume it because it happens to be a Tuesday evening, and there is absolutely nothing else remaining in the cupboards. And your aging grandmother is currently exhausted, working her 2nd consecutive shift at the diner. And your biological mother is entirely absent from the home. And you are a mere 11 years old. And you have absolutely no conceptual understanding yet that incredibly wealthy individuals residing in San Francisco possess luxury freezer appliances that literally cost more money than your grandmother's entire automobile. That specific reality is government cheese. That is the exact socio-economic foundation from which I originate. Mama's personal freezer unit was a battered Frigidaire brand appliance. She had scraped together enough cash to purchase it secondhand in the year 1982 from a neighborhood family who was urgently relocating back to Kentucky. It was a faded off-white color, heavily dented along the left-hand panel, where someone had violently struck it with a heavy object. She never once revealed the true origin of that specific dent. The primary plastic handle completely snapped off in the winter of '89. Consequently, she was forced to secure the heavy door shut, utilizing a cheap, elastic bungee cord, simply because our household absolutely could not afford the luxury of hiring a repairman to fix it. And she possessed far too much inherent pride to ever beg for outside charity. She was simply too fiercely proud to ask anyone for anything. I can assure you, there were absolutely no ultra-premium Jenny's brand desserts residing inside that specific freezer. There were 0 $13 pints of gourmet anything. The freezer was strictly reserved for containing frozen, mass-produced TV dinners, specifically the Banquet brand. You could acquire them for exactly 99 cents apiece if you managed to catch the local grocery store running a special promotion. She never once experienced the luxury of taking a genuine vacation. She habitually carried a fully loaded revolver deep within her handbag, absolutely not because she possessed a violent disposition, but fundamentally because our immediate neighborhood was incredibly violent, and she recognized she had vulnerable grandchildren she needed to fiercely protect. She passed away from this earth in 2005. I had only recently enlisted for active duty in the United States Marine Corps. I possessed absolutely no personal funds to afford a commercial airline ticket to fly home for her funeral services. Therefore, the Marine Corps generously granted me emergency compassionate leave and provided me with a complimentary ticket for a Greyhound bus ride. Her entire accumulated life estate, encompassing the modest house, the heavily worn furniture, and, yes, that battered Frigidaire appliance, held together by a bungee cord, was collectively worth significantly less money than what your husband routinely generates executing a single, well-timed trade on the stock market. The sprawling chamber remained submerged in absolute silence. It was definitively not the standard procedural silence mandated by a formal committee hearing. It was the profound, heavy silence of human beings genuinely listening to an uncomfortable truth. Madam Speaker, you enthusiastically showcased your luxurious kitchen to the entire nation during the height of the crisis in April of 2020. You eagerly displayed your massive $24,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator units, brimming with premium ice cream, and you casually proclaimed to a struggling nation that you genuinely did not know what you would possibly do without such luxury. My mother, during that exact same catastrophic month, genuinely did not know what she would possibly do without access to her next recovery meeting, without access to the single solitary room in the entire world where she was not legally required to forcefully pretend that she was emotionally stable. Those represent two incredibly divergent definitions of the phrase, "I don't know what I do." He paused, drawing a deep, deliberate breath into his lungs. The American people are absolutely not furious simply because you possess immense wealth, Madam Speaker. Allow me to make that point explicitly clear for the historical record. The citizens of this nation do not harbor an innate hatred for financial success. They actively admire it. They desperately aspire to achieve it. My late grandmother, the very same woman who was forced to tie her broken freezer shut, utilizing an elastic bungee cord, she would have been immensely, genuinely proud of any individual who started with absolutely nothing and successfully built a massive financial empire. She believed in the fundamental promise of the American dream with a fierce intensity greater than anyone I have ever encountered in my life. However, there exists a massive, unbridgeable chasm between genuinely earning your fortune and systematically rigging the game in your favor. And the American people possess the innate intelligence to easily discern the difference. They have historically always maintained the ability to tell the difference. Everyday citizens deeply resent it when their elected representative strategically purchases stock in a major semiconductor corporation and immediately thereafter utilizes their tax dollars to pass a $52 billion federal subsidy directly enriching that specific corporation. They resent it because those are their hard-earned tax dollars actively being utilized to exponentially increase your personal wealth. Everyday citizens deeply resent it when that exact same representative's immensely wealthy husband miraculously manages to liquidate massive blocks of corporate stock right before the federal government launches devastating lawsuits against Visa and, subsequently, Google replicating the identical suspicious pattern in different years, while absolutely nobody bothers to inform the general public. Everyday citizens deeply resent it when that exact same representative cheerfully displays her $24,000 luxury freezer appliances and her premium $13 ice cream, while they are simultaneously standing shivering in a flooded parking lot in the freezing rain, desperately waiting to receive a basic cardboard box of emergency groceries from a depleted community food bank. Everyday citizens deeply resent it when that exact same representative's wealthy spouse violently crashes a luxury Porsche automobile while heavily intoxicated and miraculously receives a sentence of 8 hours of light community service, while their own working-class son has his entire life utterly destroyed for committing the exact same infraction. And the American people profoundly resent it when the incredibly powerful woman who single-handedly controls the drafting of their national laws confidently stares into a camera informs them that we operate within a free market, and subsequently proceeds to financially beat every single genius Wall Street firm operating in the country. Because the citizens fundamentally understand exactly what the phrase free market truly translates to when you are the one saying it. They know it secretly translates to a completely free ride for me and a brutal, unforgiving market for you. He was physically leaning forward now, not leaning with aggressive intimidation, but leaning forward in the exact, earnest manner an individual adopts when they are attempting to communicate something of vital, life-altering importance to someone else, something they desperately require the other person to fundamentally understand. You proudly stated earlier that you have actively served in this specific building for a duration longer than I have been alive. That statement is entirely factually accurate. But I honestly believe that specific reality might be the exact root of the overarching problem. He paused once again. It was the specific variety of devastating pause that seemingly constructs an entirely separate room within the existing space, because somewhere lingering in the vast socio-economic distance between the streets of Baltimore and the mansions of San Francisco, somewhere hidden within the massive mathematical void between a standard congressman's annual salary and an accumulated fortune of $250 million, somewhere buried deep between the stringent rules you officially wrote and the convenient rules you repeatedly broke, his vocal tone dropped down until it barely registered above an intense whisper. You simply forgot exactly what government cheese tastes like. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. And Madam Speaker, if I am being entirely honest, I am genuinely not sure you ever actually knew. The collective sound that eventually moved through the expansive public gallery was definitively not applause. The presiding chairman would have aggressively shattered his gavel against the block to shut down any such display immediately. It was a reaction much harder to accurately classify. It was a sharp, collective intake of shocked breath, emanating from somewhere near the third row. It was the distinctly audible clatter of a journalist's pen, slipping from their fingers and striking the carpeted floor near the designated press section. It was the agonizing creak of a wooden chair joint as an unseen observer unconsciously shifted their weight entirely forward. The speaker's knuckles were starkly white as they pressed forcefully against the dark mahogany surface of the table. Her lips were pressed together into an incredibly thin, rigid line. The elegant pearls resting at her throat visibly rose and fell in time with a breathing pattern that was slightly, just incredibly slightly, more rapid and shallow than it had been at the absolute beginning of the afternoon. She completely failed to speak. For what was arguably the very first time throughout her sprawling 37-year career navigating the treacherous waters of the United States Congress, Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro Pelosi simply did not possess a pre-rehearsed, devastating response, ready to deploy. The presiding chairman awkwardly cleared his throat into the microphone. The distinguished gentleman's allotted time has officially expired. Vance offered a curt nod of acknowledgement, calmly gathered his empty manila folder from the desk, and rose to his feet. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman." He turned purposefully and walked steadily out of the chamber through the heavy side door. He absolutely did not cast a single glance backward over his shoulder. The digital video clip of the exchange was completely ubiquitous across every platform within an hour. The phrase "government cheese" was officially trending globally before the maintenance staff had even managed to empty the hearing room. By the time evening arrived, the footage had amassed 8 million unique views. By the stroke of midnight, that number had surged to 14 million. Enterprising individuals were manufacturing and selling commemorative T-shirts within a 24-hour window. A small, independent diner located in rural Kentucky proudly displayed the phrase "Government Cheese Special," $2.99 boldly across its illuminated roadside marquee. A military veteran residing in Texas recorded a video of himself holding up a solid block of processed cheese directly to the camera lens, stating firmly, "This right here is exactly what they chose to forget. That specific secondary video secured 11 million views of its own. The speaker ultimately departed from the Capitol building through a highly secured, private side entrance at exactly 17 minutes past 4 o'clock. She offered no public statements. She entertained absolutely zero questions from the gathered press pool. A dedicated legislative aide dutifully held a large umbrella over her head as she walked to her waiting vehicle, despite the undeniable fact that it was not currently raining. Her seasoned director of communications officially informed the aggressive press corps that the speaker remained immensely proud of her multiple decades dedicated to honorable public service. A junior-level aide would later discreetly inform a trusted journalist, strictly off the official record, that the speaker had not uttered a single, solitary word during the entire duration of the car ride home. Not one single word. In all his years serving on her staff, he had never once witnessed such a phenomenon. She fundamentally always possessed the perfect next sentence, locked and ready. The overwhelming silence she projected in that vehicle was significantly louder and far more devastating than any defensive statement she could have possibly articulated. JD Vance finally guided his vehicle into the private driveway of his residence located in Cincinnati at exactly 47 minutes past 8 o'clock in the evening. His commercial flight had experienced a frustrating delay while sitting at the airport gate. A random woman traversing the terminal had instantly recognized his face. "You're that government cheese guy," she had enthusiastically noted. The interior of the house was entirely peaceful and quiet. His wife, Usha, had thoughtfully left the front door unlocked in anticipation of his late arrival. The young boys were already fast asleep in their beds. Ewan's bedroom door was left slightly cracked open to the hallway, while the soothing, rhythmic hum of a white noise machine emanated clearly from the infant's nursery. Vance paused quietly in the darkened hallway, simply standing still and allowing himself to listen to the gentle, unbroken sound of his children breathing peacefully. It was a simple, everyday sound that never ceased being entirely remarkable and miraculous to a man who had been raised in a chaotic environment where the loudest, the most distinct sounds echoing through the hallways were almost universally the most terrifying ones. Usha was relaxing in the comfortable living room, completely barefoot, diligently reviewing a complex legal brief. "How did the hearing ultimately go?" she inquired softly. He slowly lowered himself onto the sofa, exhaustedly loosening the tight knot of his necktie. "I found myself constantly thinking about Maman. Was it an incredibly difficult experience?" "No." He paused, genuinely pondering the question. "That is precisely what is bothering me so deeply. The established facts are simply the established facts. She unequivocally purchased the corporate stock. She unequivocally blocked the reform bill. She enthusiastically showed the entire country her premium ice cream during a crisis. The evidence is all just sitting right there in the open. She would have absolutely despised every single minute of that spectacle," Usha gently noted, tilting her head. "Pelosi?" "No," Usha corrected softly. "Maman. The massive hearing, the staggering numerical figures, the absolute tragic reality that such a confrontation was even fundamentally necessary to occur in the first place." From the adjacent room, the mechanical white noise machine continued its soothing, rhythmic humming. His youngest son shifted comfortably in his deep sleep, displaying the absolute, unwavering trust, characteristic of a protected child who had never once harbored a single doubt that both of his loving parents would miraculously still be present when the morning sun finally arrived. That specific, unshakable security was the single thing Vance had desired most in his entire life. It was not the prestigious Senate seat. It was not the dramatic, high-profile committee hearing. It was certainly not the viral video clip that was currently burning a massive hole straight through the fabric of the internet. He had fundamentally only ever wanted to successfully build a stable home environment where his children could sleep soundly through the night. A home where the kitchen freezer reliably functioned. A home where absolutely nobody lied about their whereabouts, or lied about what illicit substances they had consumed, or lied about exactly when they promised they would finally return. Somewhere far away, located deep within the struggling neighborhoods of Middletown, Ohio, sitting abandoned inside the dusty garage of a modest house that had been completely sold and transferred twice since the day Mama passed away, a battered Frigidaire appliance. Missing its primary handle, sat completely forgotten, used by absolutely no one anymore. The cheap elastic bungee cord that once held it securely shut had dry-rotted and snapped many years ago. The internal electrical compressor had not successfully cycled on since the winter of 2009. If an individual were to grasp the edge of that door, and if they were to pull outward with enough physical force, the ancient rubber seal would eventually break its grip with a soft, wet, peeling sound. The dark, stagnant interior would instantly smell strongly of settled dust, decaying old rubber, and something else faintly, distinctly chemical. But hiding beneath all of those surface odors, if you were exactly the specific kind of person who remembered such things, you could still manage to catch a fleeting, unmistakable trace of it. Government cheese. It carried the distinct, lingering scent of a nation that used to genuinely believe the established rules applied equally to absolutely everyone. It smelled exactly like the soul of America, long before the era of the premium ice cream had completely taken over.